As I said, it is a session on a workshop on teaching the metal in the classroom, and I'm extremely excited for it. Like many of you, I have taught with metal. In fact, as much as I like the metal scholarship, I like to write metal scholarship, I like to listen to metal scholarship. My first love of metal studies really came from the use of it in the classroom. I have now a dedicated class where I use metal to teach. And I think it's a growing subject. There is a volume that is being in the works of people who've written essays about the way they use metal to teach. And I think the more we can talk about what we do with it and share our insights, the better. So with that, let me turn to introducing the panelists and let them take over. So first, I'm going to introduce Antje Bosselmann-Ruickbie, who studied art history, archaeology, and ancient history at Bonn University, Germany. Antje is currently at Gießen Institute of Art History. She is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and an associate member of the Leibniz Science Campus in Mainz and Frankfurt, where she focuses on Byzantium between Orient and Occident. Antje has published extensively on Byzantine goldsmiths' works and enamels, cultural exchange in the Middle Ages, technical art history, Byzantine magic, and on Byzantium and heavy metal music. Next, Stefanie Acquavella-Rauch, who holds degrees from the Philipps-Universität in Marburg, Germany. She is a tenured professor of historical musicology at the Johannes Gutenberg-Universität in Mainz. She has 15 years of teaching experience from various universities and was a visiting scholar at the University of California, San Diego. Her main research interests are compositional processes in Vienna around 1900 and in contemporary music cultures, musical practices from the 18th to the 21st century, methods of music research, operetta and symphonic poems, as well as topics of digital music, musicology, and music editing. Her publication list includes 7 books, 3 journal issues, more than 30 articles in journals and book chapters. Together with Nico Schuler, she is the co-editor of the international research book series Methodology of Music Research, which came out or is coming out from Peter Lang International Academic Publishers. Sorry, let me. Our third panelist is Taylor Franconi, who is a visiting assistant professor at the Yukoski Institute for Archaeology in the Ancient World at Brown University. He is a Roman archaeologist interested in the economic and environmental history of the Roman Empire, especially the northwestern provinces of Gaul, Germania, and Britannia. Taylor has conducted archaeological fieldwork in the United States, Tunisia, and Italy, and he currently co-directs the excavation of a Roman villa and early medieval settlement in Vacona, Italy. Needless to say, as will become obvious from their presentations, all 3 of them have taught with metal, and what they've taught will come up in their talks, but it's also on their lengthier bios on the website. So with that, I will turn it over to you guys.
All right, I guess I'll start, guys. Thank you very much, Shama, for the introduction. And thanks to Jeremy, Charlotte, and Shama all together for encouraging us to put together this workshop to talk about our experiences. I think we're all really excited to do so. Just to elaborate a little bit more on what we're going to do for the next hour and a bit, we're going to start with about 10 minutes each to introduce what we've done in sort of very brief overview. And then we're going to take the rest of the session to divide that up into more targeted discussions about content, methods, and logistics kind of things. So what we taught about, how we did it, challenges we faced, anything like that people are interested in discussing. So I'm going to start off the presentations, and then I think Stefanie and then Antje will follow with their own. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that? Yeah?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. All right, so I'll start just by giving an overview of the class that I taught. That was called Somewhere Back in Time, The Ancient World in Heavy Metal. This was a class that I taught at Brown University back in the spring of 2023 for the first time. And I taught it within the archaeology department. It was an undergraduate class. I taught to about 30 students. And I had, when I decided to do this, I had kind of expected that people enrolling in the class would either be archaeology, history, classics interested students or metalheads. And in the end, actually, there were very few of either at the start of this semester. I think by the end, I had converted quite a few more, but it was an interesting mix that really led to having to start with square one, both from musical and also an archaeological and historical perspective, which was an interesting job. So the class met 3 times a week for 50 minutes each over the course of a 13-week semester. And we had 4 very general goals that I outline here for what the class was supposed to accomplish. And so first and foremost, to understand the current state of both archaeology and heavy metal studies as academic disciplines, and to examine the sounds, images, and words that bands use to focus on antiquity as a major theme. And particularly to understand the archaeological and historical context of these representations of the past and critically examine both source material and the modern narratives derived from it. And finally, to understand how these artistic representations of the past function within a modern framework of globalism, nationalism, extremism, race, gender, identity, and many other things that came up along the way. The course was really multimedia intensive, as you can imagine. And so Canvas, which is an online teaching platform that we used for a variety of things, it's similar to Blackboard. I'm sure many of you have experience with these generally terrible programs. We used Canvas, and I used it to really host most everything that we were doing. And this included all of the readings, so their weekly reading lists, but also the weekly playlists that went with them. And to do that, I used YouTube to set up playlists, much like the conference organizers did for the weekend, and just link them all to our syllabus. All of this was available there, as well as weekly lyrics sheets that we used to discuss material in class. For that, I used Google Docs because it was easily editable so that everyone could access it simultaneously. And yeah. In terms of content, I'll say a little bit more, but I'd say within the first 5 minutes of starting the class, in which I'll say at Brown, it's not unusual to have a huge number of people show up to your first class and then many of them disappear thereafter. There were a huge number of people that showed up to this first class. I think it was like 85 people. The room was overflowing. And so I said, you know what, we're going to listen to a song just to make sure that everybody's where they want to be. And so the first song that I played was Winterfeldt's Mom Tour, which I realized I did not click the button to play music. Oh, wait. And this is, oh, wait.
If you didn't click the button, you should unshare
Not playing? Okay.
when you are about to reshare.
Okay, so you know what? I'll just come back to that at another time. I decided to play Winterfeldt's song, Mom Tour. Some of you may know it. Black metal from central Britain. That was both caustic enough that about 15 people immediately got up and left, but also really nicely highlighted the ways that some of this music can engage with archaeology. So not just some of the textual representations of the past, but also really some of the physical monuments of the past. In this song, Mom Tour, which comes from the album The Ghost of Heritage, is talking about a mountain in the Southern Peaks District, which I'll show you here on the next slide. In Derbyshire, called Mom Tor, which is the Brythonic name meaning Mother Mountain for this very notable landmark that is topped by a Bronze Age and Iron Age hill fort surrounded by barrows, and at the bottom, still very visible remnants of industrial mining all around. And the album cover pictures the mountain, as you can see here on the bottom right, but also the nearby Peveril Castle. And Winterfeldt is a band that derives a lot of their musical content from the English past, from a variety of periods. But they are the only band that I know of that's written a song explicitly about a hill fort with barrows. So I thought that was a really interesting place to start. We went on from here, and over the course of the semester, we were able to talk about different kinds of inspirations and different kinds of representations that ranged from kind of the deep prehistory of Northern Europe, looking at like Heilung's interpretations of things. It include going back to like the Mesolithic burial here, the shaman from Bad Dürrenberg in northern Germany. You can see that one of the singers, Maria Franz, wearing a very similar headdress to this Mesolithic burial. And also the materiality, not just the textual sources that Helveti draws upon, but also the very real archaeological sources that they drew upon. So including, like, for the lyrics to their song Desumis Lugae, drawing directly from the text of the Chemalier tablet, which is a magical text written sometime around the turn of the millennium, or the fact that their name itself is taken from a graffito that's carved into a pot from northern Italy that simply reads the Helvetian, probably denoting ownership. Or that one of their early albums that we heard about earlier, Slania, the name is taken from this Levantine grave stele from Switzerland that sort of represents these two anthropomorphic figures, one here, the other here, slightly taller. You can see feet, heads. And it says, this is the grave for Slania. It says, this is a grave next to it for Tisios. So as a band, they draw very heavily on archaeological material as well. And so this class was really a great way to explore some of this influence. And I organized it over the course of the semester to do it kind of progressively through time. And so after a few introductory classes, we moved to our first case study in Egypt. Then we progressed through the Greek world, the Roman world, the Iron Age European world, into late antiquity, the early medieval period, and finally ending with the Vikings. For each one of these, the discussion started off fairly broad, but then narrowed in each week onto a very concrete sort of archaeological or historical case study around which we could really center our discussions. And so you can see in many cases, those were almost entirely historical battles or some kind of conflict that recur often in different settings. So things like we already heard about the Punic Wars, the Battle at Alesia, Thermopylae, Lindisfarne. We took the opportunity to look at the way that these very specific events have been depicted and used repeatedly in music, but then also what kind of material they were drawing from and how that worked. I was lucky to have several guests come to class, including Jeremy, who very generously gave his time to come down and visit and give a great lecture. I also had several people sort of more domestically from Brown, including Dave Bukta, who's a Sanskrit specialist, notably also the founding bassist of the band Glassjaw, came and talked about the reception of Sanskrit textual sources, particularly in hardcore, but also to some extent metal. Leah Neiman, who was my TA for the course, gave some really excellent lectures on pseudo-archaeology and the dangers of thinking that aliens build pyramids, things like that. And then Andrew Scherer came and talked about Mesoamerican history, mythology, archaeology, and the way that it gets wrapped into a lot of material from South and Central America. And then finally, we were joined for the week on the Vikings by the early medieval historian Jonathan Conant, who himself is not a metal fan at all, but really likes to talk about the way that the Vikings are received. And so he put a lot into it, came in and left maybe a little bit more of a metalhead than he was. It happened to overlap with some really relevant music nearby in Boston and Worcester, Massachusetts. And so I was able to direct students to go see Fletchcott Apocalypse, Helveti, Rotting Christ, Enslaved. Not many of them did, but we did have an outing to see Rotting Christ. Some students came up and met Jeremy and I in Boston to see this, and that was a lot of fun. Now, in terms of assignments, I'm just going to sort of introduce these and then we can come back to them. But I had 4 major things that students had to do over the course of the semester. One of them every week, which was to come up with a song not on the playlist already assigned that dealt with the topic for the week. And you also couldn't repeat it between students. So every week, students would post a song with a link to the music, usually to YouTube, the lyrics, and then some kind of brief interpretation of how it connected to the week. which resulted in an additional expanded playlist for the class of about 300 songs over the course of the semester. I also tried what I thought was going to be a very clever assignment, turned out to be a huge pain, to use Metal Archives to get students to look at sort of the global context of a lot of the things we were doing. So I set a bunch of questions that was like, go out and find out how many bands write about whatever, Carthage, how many bands talk about Lindisfarne, things like that. And what I didn't plan on was that this database changes so rapidly that it was impossible to grade. I wound up being like, if you were within 20% of the number that I thought it was when I set the question, I'll accept it, because even what I looked for at the time I was grading it was different. That was irritating, but I think ultimately it still helped serve some of the purpose. As sort of a midterm, they had to do an analysis of album artwork, albums that particularly were displaying material objects. And so I gave them an option of 10 or 15 different albums that they could draw from, and they had to identify what was on it, how it was being used, where it came from, and why. So as example, see Forefathers Steadfast album here, where we have these two Anglo-Saxons, we presume, wearing much of the material from the Sutton Hoo ship burial, standing in front of a timber hall with two Grubenhäuser in the background. Or like Heidevolk's album, The Batavia in the Bottom, which is showing this, the Nijmegen cavalry parade mask, which is a Roman piece of parade armor from the 1st century AD. So they had to think about that. They had to find the inspiration. And finally, for the final project, they had to design a themed festival, which was a 3-part project. They had to design a poster. They had to come up with a list of bands and their set lists. And then they also had to write a sort of critical assessment of the ways that the bands, the set list that they chose, were speaking to the certain historical theme. These were really excellent. There was a wide range of things that people dealt with, everything from like Alexander the Great to these two examples, Carthago Delenda Fest, or Mesopotamia, dealing with, as you can imagine, Carthage and Mesopotamia in heavy metal. So overall, I think the class was a really great success. It got a bunch of people interested in things that they had no idea existed. And I certainly learned a lot along the way. And I am really looking forward to talking more about that, and especially hearing from my colleagues about their own experiences. So thank you for that.
So, thank you very much, Tyler. I will try to share my screen and then start my presentation. I will ask you if you can actually see what I'm sharing. Okay. And I'll do it again because I would like to click the options. Okay. Okay, now, which screen can you see? Is it the one with the big presentation on it?
It's your first one.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, great. So my approach was I did some team teaching with me being a musicologist and a colleague from religious studies. She's specializing in practical Protestant religion practices of the 20th century. We did a class on the heavy metal mass, heavy metal ritual and religion, it was called. We did it in Mainz, Germany. So at the beginning, we set ourselves a few goals. The big goal is the last one on the slide you can see, and that is we wanted to understand, and we wanted the students to understand why the band Powerwolf that we picked as example say that they are celebrating a heavy metal mass. And oops, there's a spelling mistake coming from the German way of writing it. pronouncing it. So in order to reach that, we had various goals that we wanted the students to achieve. The first one was we wanted them to understand how interdisciplinary approaches can benefit to understand various layers of a cultural phenomenon, being heavy metal studies in this case. We wanted them to understand and to use a new method, which was a qualitative method of videography. We wanted our students to understand and use not just the software related to it, but we also wanted to introduce them to the concept of annotating a longer event, being a concert. Why is that so special? Because I'll get to that in a few minutes, but the group of students we had, they were familiar with historical methods, meaning they are more or less trained to look at sources and to do more hermeneutic approach to phenomena. Whereas what we wanted to do is more performance related, and therefore we needed different methods. And so that was one of the the background methods we wanted them to learn. How did we do that? We looked at 2 festival concerts of the band Powerwolf, one being Summer Breeze and one being Hellfest in summer 2023. And our class took place in autumn and winter 2023-2024. You'll see that in a minute. So what we tried to make them understand is the various contexts of the band's performances and imagery. To give you an idea, I will show you a little bit more about the band and why it fascinated us. So what actually triggered it was that Powerwolf released a new album in Easter 2023, and they called it the Heavy Metal Ostermesse. And you can see like a little article about that. And so we knew they are playing with Christian symbols, with Christian celebrations, with rituals, and so on and so forth. And this is what it looks like. Just a little snippet.
Will be done here and now, my life in heaven. My will be done. Christ our Savior, bring the sacrament for my will be done. I command you, will be done.
So, and as you just heard, the parts of the Lord's Prayer being in a song. There's a song called Agnus Dei, and so on and so forth. So it's a very rich material base that we presented to the students. Let's look at the course materials and the accessibility that we provided. We decided to use MS Teams for it. Our university provides 2 different learning platforms, and we thought, because we wanted the students to interact and do a lot of group work and a lot of communication with each other, that Teams was the better choice. We had our own team, we were sharing documents, we were having various subgroups in it for the communications, we were posting assignments, everything you can see on the slide. The video material that we used was, of course, available on YouTube, but not only, and that is in Germany always a political thing. It was also shown on a public media channel named Arte, which is a French-German cooperation channel, and that was nice to not just rely on YouTube for that. So I've been talking about us. Sonja thought she might be able to make it, but she didn't. So Sonja Beckmeyer, you can see an older picture of her. She sent that to me and me, and then we had participants from different disciplines. We had 4 theology students who were in a more like advanced year of studying, more like something that is equivalent to the English-speaking master. We also had 10 musicology students, 2 major and 8 minors. One of the majors is here. His name is Patrick Marx, and I've seen his face. He's actually responsible for me being here, which is kind of nice because he was in contact with Antje, and he mentioned that he's doing the course, and so he connected us, which was really nice. So thank you very much for that. He's a master student of musicology. We also had the majority of students from musicology were bachelor students. So it was a bit unusual that we actually allowed Patrick Marx to be there, but I'm quite glad we did. The majors, the other 8 had, you can see that on the slide. I don't think I have to repeat it. Just important for the course was that we had about 4 or 5 people from theater studies. And that came in very, very handy because those people are trained to look at performances and especially to look at stage settings and stage performances, gestures, body movement, and so on and so forth. And to decipher body signs, basically. Okay. How did we do it? We decided to have in-class phases and group phases. We divided the group up into 4 subgroups, and we made sure each group had a theology student to make the students aware of their various and different expertises. What we tried to do in class was mainly the introductory work to everything that is listed there: metal studies, musicology, theology, but also to the methods that we used, like video analysis, to the program we wanted the students to get familiar with, Max QDA. We also always came back to discuss the assignments and the group work that we assigned to the students. Also, I think quite important was discussing the categories for the annotations to make sure that we all were on the same track, understanding what we wanted to look at. And of course, interwoven with it all was always like, what does all this mean? What do we see? And what's behind everything? The course schedule, and you can see we had 13 sessions, and you can see it was more or less meeting every second week kind of thing, but not always. There are some examples of what of the materials we used, very old-fashioned ones, and of course I didn't take a screenshot of Teams because I thought that's something you might actually know. This is Max QDA, so you can see that the group of students managed, and I'm quite proud that the students actually did manage to annotate 2 entire concerts of Powerwolf. And annotate means that they looked through the festivals, I don't know, 5, 6 times, and they annotated the different categories. You can see them in the, what's that, probably the left corner of your screen. You can see something called the code system. And so they were always assigning codes or categories to what they were seeing. So this was done to help understand what is going on in the festivals. What did the students have to do? they did various assignments. You can see that. I won't go into much more detail because I don't want to take more time away from our session. But the main thing is that they had to do various stages of video analysis and noting down, annotating what they saw. And with different focus points, and of course annotating the music was a particular challenge. So I can show you that later. So this was an assignment example. So it's just to highlight what we did. The thing I'm most proud of, I think, in the end, is that we formed an interdisciplinary writing group after the class was done. Normally students go off and that was it, but in this case they had invested so much time that and they were so smart that we, Sonja and I, we decided to ask them if they wanted to write a journal article together with us about the outcome of our course. They had done all these annotations, and the conclusions are there. So many questions were there at the end of the course. So we thought, hey, let's try and put it down in writing. And that is the stage we are currently at. And I hope that within the next few months, we will have some written results. And so thank you very much. If you want to know more about it, I think we can go into more detail in a minute. So I will unshare my screen, which isn't so easy because all of a sudden I cannot see my cursor anymore. Okay. Has anybody had that problem before? I
think
cannot.
I can stop your sharing for you.
If you could do that, that would be awesome, because I cannot see my mouse anymore, like the cursor. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great outcome that you will even publish with your students. That's fantastic. I'm going to report on our course in Gießen University. And the course had a long winding title to kind of squeeze everything in for all the all the disciplines we wanted to bring in. And it was called Heavy Metal Artwork, Approaches from, approaches from history and art history, and questions of possibilities of use in school and universities. Okay, that says it all. And it was done at Justus-Liebig-Universität Gießen in Germany. And both teachers at the time worked there. And here you can see happy students. And yeah, they were really engaged. Not all of the students were there at all days. So it's just a selection of students. So the disciplines we wanted to bring in were cross-department. Thomas Göttlich, who's unfortunately not here, he had to drop out on short notice, and he's a teacher of English and history at the Goethe-Schule in Wetzlar. For 5 years, he was a lecturer at Gießen University in the history of didactic. So when he works as a teacher, he also trains teachers to be. And he's also, and that brings in another discipline, he's a practicing metal musician. He was bassist for Gravedigger and runs his own band Rebellion, and is bassist for Thornbridge for a short while. And I'm a lecturer for art history at Gießen University. And my specialization is in the Middle Ages, and particularly Byzantium. And when it comes to media, I work on metalwork, medieval metalwork. So even in real life, I deal with metal. So it was a compact course, and we spent almost 3 days, 2.5 days over 2 consecutive weekends. That was for practical reasons. We couldn't do a weekly course in summer 23. And we used StudIP learning management system. So we could upload material and students and teachers could contact each other and so on. And just roughly, the idea was to devote the first day to art history, the second day to history and the didactics of history. Day 3 was the preparation for the graded paper. This is just a very short overview. As to the participants, I'll give you an example in a minute. We had 17 male and female participants. 10 students participated to gain credit points, and the others dropped in, not for every day, but there were 7 people who took part just for sheer interest. The majority was metal fans, but there were actually some people who had absolutely no previous encounter with metal at all, something I had personally not expected. We had a majority of history students, and they were all teachers to be and were working towards a teaching diploma and were in their 2nd and 3rd year. So we had art history was totally underrepresented, something I found disappointing. But we also had 1 student of applied theater sciences. We had a guest lecture by a PhD student from the law department of our university, Pavla Samoilova, and she presented her research into heavy metal and free speech. And she's also a metal singer, so also has this practical approach. Learning goals, nothing surprising. We wanted to encourage to study the lyrics and the visual arts. So it was decisively not musicology, but the artwork and the texts. And we only wanted to involve albums by bands who worked with history, who referred to history in a conceptual way. So it was concept albums we were looking at. The kind of approach was to make history students familiar with art historical methods and art history as a discipline, and then vice versa. And then, of course, present to them what is metal studies, the state of research. We wanted to encourage them to use for their own work later, for their own jobs later, and most of them would become teachers at schools, to use innovative ways of teaching history using metal album lyrics and artwork as starting points. And of course, interdisciplinary research, teamwork are keywords that were very important to us. Assignments and grading. We've decided, because the majority was the history students, to give them all the same task, something that is called Großer Unterrichtsentwurf, a comprehensive teaching plan for a teaching unit. So they would, in detail, prepare a lesson for their pupils in school. 45 to 90 minutes, they could choose, they could imagine a learning group, they could imagine a setting, and all the things you have to write into this teaching plan. And the one art historical student, we jammed in with the other ones. She had to do the same task. So we decided not to give them a list of albums, but to choose some, but not of course, but they did follow our suggestions. I talked about my research on the Teresa's albums, The Varangian Way and Stand Up and Fight, and Thomas presented one of his own rebellion albums in more detail, Wird Bidfullaret, from the history of the Saxons. And I found a long list of translations you can look up in the literature in the footnote, which I haven't put together myself. That was ripped, but I found it quite funny. This is the album in question by Thomas Band Rebellion, History of the Saxons. He's done 3 albums on the history of the Vikings, but this one shows on the cover the Exernsteine in Germany in the Teutoburg forest. And here is a song list. You can see the Irminsul, Hengist is mentioned, and so on. Just quickly, albums we talked about: Teresa's Rebellion, Miklagard album, on Constantinople, Leaves' Eyes, The Last Viking, Aeternum on Byzantine history. And I started off with doing kind of art historical groundwork, how to analyze a picture. And the favorite is, of course, the Arnolfini wedding. Is so rich in details, is amazing. And because we are also, yeah, pet lovers, just one of the examples, you can even read a symbolism into the dog and where do you get the sources? There is, for example, an article on dogs in Byzantium that was recently published. So just to show them how we approach the analysis of an image. And contrasted this rich symbolistic picture with these album covers. How do we deal with them in art history? They're just mostly black. What methodology can we use? So that led us to the discussion of monochrome art and especially metal color schemes. Just one example, Yves Klein's blue paintings, which were monochrome. There are lots of images after Yves Klein. And then discuss the colors used in metal. And there is a shift. So Wacken offers these death metal t-shirts. H&M offers these Metallica line, or did last year. And you can even see metal fans trying to be different. So how black is metal really? And then as one task, we read together what is black in black metal, elucidating the darkness in black album covers through Panofsky's picture analysis to find out that this article was not really art historically enough. So we did a text analysis and as another goal, try to work on colors in metal. Just an example, Thomas would have brought in his side from the history of didactics, but I hope I've covered it a bit. And I want to leave more room now for the discussion.